Hello again, feral friends and fellow nature nerds. Well, it's October 1st as of the publishing of this episode, so that means it's officially spooky season. And yeah, I know that plenty of stores have had Halloween stuff out since the end of August. Don't get me started on that. But I refuse to acknowledge it until at least the 1st of October, which of course is today, so now we can call it official. Now, on the last Dirt Dispatch episode, I played a recording of my local coyotes responding to the song Taps that plays over the loudspeakers here every weeknight at 10 o'clock. And going out several nights in a row to try and record that phenomenon got me thinking about being outside in the dark and how nocturnal wildlife, especially if they're vocal about it like coyotes and owls, are often viewed with a sort of, fear, but if not fear, then certainly with a certain amount of suspicion and foreboding. Coyotes are often feared and vilified, and historically, owls were often associated with death and the underworld. But today I want to talk about another animal that fits into that same description. It's a non-owl, seldom seen but very vocal nocturnal bird, the whippoorwill. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, and this is the Dispatches from the Forest podcast. We're not so much afraid of the dark per se, but of the things that are out there in the dark, the things the darkness is concealing. You know what I mean? And the things we hear out in the darkness, so we know that there's something out there, but we can't see it, those things have a tendency to become the stuff of myth and legend. And whippoorwills are one of those things. And because of their song, which is kind of loud and strange and a little bit lonesome, they're the subject of many a legend. One legend from New England says the whippoorwill can sense a departing soul and capture it as it flees. Now, horror writer H.P. Lovecraft adapted this idea into his story The Dunwich Horror. In Lovecraft's story, quote, if they can catch the fleeing soul when it leaves the body, they instantly flutter away, chittering in demonic laughter. But if they fail, they subside gradually into disappointed silence. Now, what they do with that soul if they catch it kind of remains a mystery. But other writers have also used whippoorwills as a literary device. James Thurber's short story Whippoorwill has the constant nighttime singing of a whippoorwill resulting in the maddening insomnia of the protagonist, who eventually completely loses his mind and kills everyone in his house, including himself. Whew, seems like a problem a couple of cotton balls could have solved. Another piece of folklore associated with the repeated call of a whippoorwill night after night is that it's an omen of death. An article in the 1892 Journal of American Folklore documented this superstition from Maine. Quote, if a whippoorwill sings night after night near a door or under a window, it is a sure sign of approaching death in the house. For instance, a whippoorwill sang at a back door repeatedly. The woman's son was brought home dead, and the corpse was brought into the house through the back door, unquote. Now, to be fair, this is just a simple matter of probability. Whippoorwills and things that would kill you were both much more common in the 17 and 1800s, so the chances of someone dying in a house near where a whippoorwill was singing was relatively high. And how many households heard a whippoorwill and everybody was just fine? I'm guessing a lot more than those that suffered a tragedy. But not every reference and legend relating to whippoorwills is quite so dark. Many songs and literary references just use the call of the whippoorwill as a representation of an iconic nighttime sound, like the hooting of an owl. One superstition holds that the year's first whippoorwill could predict the number of years you have left to live or until you got married. You just had to count the number of times the bird repeats its name. The year's first whippoorwill could also allegedly cure backaches, but you had to roll or somersault 3 times when you heard it. Oof, sounds like it's more likely to give you a backache. It could also guarantee wealth, but again, only if you had a pocket or purse full of coins, which you had to vigorously shake when hearing the bird. But if you had a pocket full of coins, wouldn't that mean you were already... You know what? Never mind. Trying to figure out the logic behind some of these folk tales will give you a headache. The song of the year's first whippoorwill was also thought to have the power to grant wishes and make dreams come true. But again, to activate this magic, it usually required a particularly elaborate ritual of some sort. For example, one superstition said, when you hear the first whippoorwill in the springtime, you should lie down on the ground, roll over 3 times, then reach over your left shoulder and pick up the first thing your hand rests upon. Put this under your pillow at night, go to sleep lying on your right side, and whatever you dream about will surely come to pass. That sounds like way too much work. But then again, maybe hearing the whippoorwill cures the backache that you got from rolling around on the ground to do this ritual. Now, the last one I want to mention may be the only one with some actual truth behind it. Move over, Robin, because hearing the year's first whippoorwill was understood to be a sign of spring. Now, this one actually makes sense since whippoorwills return to their breeding grounds in the northeastern United States in April or May. So the bird's return likely coincided with the end of the threat of frost. And the end of frost meant it was time to plant crops like corn and beans, turn the cattle out to pasture, and let the kids go barefoot. So, what exactly are these ominous and magical birds? Well, whippoorwills belong to a family of nocturnal or crepuscular birds known as nightjars, which are found on every continent except Antarctica. Nightjars are a medium-sized bird, about the size of a robin, and they have some common characteristics, such as long pointed wings and small feet, so small in fact that they're not very good for walking. The color of their plumage, generally a mottled gray, black, and brown that blends incredibly well with tree bark or leaf litter, combined with their habit of perching either in trees or on the ground, help conceal them during the day. Because of this, seeing a whippoorwill, or any member of the nightjar family for that matter, is a rare occurrence, not because they're not necessarily there, but just because they're active at night and really, really well camouflaged during the day. As for the eastern whippoorwill, they breed in deciduous or mixed woodlands across central and southeastern Canada and the eastern United States, migrating to the southeastern United States and to eastern Mexico and Central America during the winter. They're generally solitary, but they will form loose flocks during migration. On a side note though, the smallest North American nightjar, the common poorwill, which lives in dry, sparsely vegetated areas from British Columbia and southeastern Alberta in Canada through the western United States to northern Mexico, is the only bird known to hibernate, or at least go into an extended state of torpor. Now, as I've mentioned on the podcast before, winter survival strategies, which generally for birds is either sticking around and staying active or getting out of Dodge and heading south, are all about food. Birds, or any animal for that matter, that stays active in one place during the winter need to be able to find something to eat. Nightjars, which includes the whippoorwill and common poorwill, are insectivores. So in the colder parts of their range, staying put isn't really an option. Migration is almost mandatory. And hibernation, not just among nightjars, but in the entire universe of living birds, is quite unique. So while common poorwills breeding in the northernmost part of their range migrate to central and western Mexico for the winter, some stay further north. And these individuals will spend much of the winter, weeks or even months, inactive, concealed in piles of rocks. How cool is that? Now, like I mentioned, nightjars are insectivores. Eastern whippoorwills forage at night, catching primarily insects like moths, beetles, and mosquitoes, but really any insect that they can find. They fly slowly and silently, often wheeling around 180 degrees in between wing flaps, and they can fly nearly vertically when chasing insects. It's thought that they locate prey by seeing the bug's silhouette against the sky. The whippoorwill's eyes have a reflective structure, the tapetum lucidum behind the retina, an adaptation to being active in low light conditions found in many nocturnal animals, including owls. And like owls, they regurgitate pellets of undigested material. Of course, in their case, it's mostly insect exoskeletons. Whippoorwills generally start foraging 30 minutes after sunset and continue until it gets too dark to see their prey. Then they resume feeding at first light, stopping about 40 minutes before sunrise. But when the moon's bright enough, they'll hunt all night long. Remember that because we're going to come back to it. Now, from a perch in a tree or on the ground, they usually make short sallies to snag insects up to 15 feet off the ground. But they do sometimes take longer insect-catching flights. They have enormous mouths compared to their body size, which lets them swallow insects up to 2 inches or 5 centimeters long. They may also sometimes search rotten logs and leaves for ants, caterpillars, beetles, worms, and other insects. Now, nightjars typically have something called rictal bristles, stiff hair-like feathers around the base of the beak, something that's common in insectivorous birds. Now, the function of these bristles, though, is uncertain, but of course several possibilities have been proposed. They might function as a sort of net, helping capture flying prey, although to date there's no empirical evidence to support this hypothesis. There is some experimental evidence to suggest that the bristles may prevent particles from striking the eyes if, say, for example, a prey item is missed or broken apart on contact. They may also help protect the eyes from other particles encountered in flight or from casual contact with vegetation. There's also evidence that the rictal bristles of some species may function tactily, similar to mammalian whiskers. Studies have shown that structures called Herbst corpuscles, which are mechanoreceptors sensitive to pressure and vibration, are found in association with rictal bristles. And if you need a tongue twister, say rictal bristles and Herbst corpuscles 10 times fast. So these bristles might help with prey detection, prey handling, navigation in the dark, or the gathering of information during flight. Now, interestingly, because these birds are so secretive, not much is known about their mating rituals. For example, unlike a lot of birds, nobody knows whether the male or the female chooses the nesting site. What is known is that males establish and maintain their territory by calling along the perimeter and chasing off intruders while making aggressive calls and hisses with raised wings and open mouth. And if you hadn't already figured out why they're called whippoorwills, the answer is in your call. Let's listen to it again. It sounds like they're saying their name. And the same is true for the common poorwill. On a side note, there are other nightjars in North America, but their common names don't really reflect the sound of their call, with the exception of the Mexican whippoorwill, which sounds pretty much like the eastern whippoorwill. But for example, the chuck-will's widow is also a resident of the southeastern U.S., and it sounds like this. And then there are any of the several species of nighthawks, which aren't actually hawks, by the way, and don't sound similar to any of the wills. Now, whippoorwills don't build a nest. The female lays her eggs, generally 2, directly on the leaf litter of the forest floor, usually on the north or northeast side of a small shrub or a clump of grass or a seedling, something that will shade the nest from the hot afternoon sun. The weight of the incubating adult may eventually create a slight nest-like hollow in the leaf litter, but despite the absence of nest material, the eggs, nestlings, and adults are all so well camouflaged that they're extremely difficult to spot. In fact, whippoorwills will often stay on their nest until they nearly get stepped on. But when disturbed, both males and females are known to feign injury, much like a killdeer, to lead predators away from the nest. A common whippoorwill disturbed on the nest will often tumble out, open its mouth, and hiss in an apparent imitation of a snake. That's pretty bold stuff. Okay, so remember when I said I was going to come back to the fact that when the moon is bright enough, whippoorwills will hunt all night long? Well, whippoorwills time their nesting so that the chicks will hatch about 10 days before the full moon, which gives the parents more time and moonlight to catch food for them. Chicks are semi-precocial when they hatch. Parents regurgitate food for them, and within days of hatching, the chicks might leave the nest if a predator comes near. At about 8 days old, the chicks molt into their highly camouflaged plumage, and the mother leaves them in care of their father, often laying a new clutch of eggs nearby within the territory. Shout out to the at-home dads. Whippoorwills can live 13 to 15 years in the wild. Now, nocturnal birds like the eastern whippoorwill are hard to study with standard methods, which usually involve people reporting the number and species of various birds they see during the day. You see the problem here. It's hard to study population trends for birds that are extraordinarily difficult to actually see. But that said, studies estimate that eastern whippoorwill populations have declined by 1.8% per year between 1966 and 2023, a cumulative decline of 66% over that period. The 2025 State of the Birds report lists the eastern whippoorwill as a yellow alert tipping point species, meaning that it's lost more than half of its population in the last 50 years, but has been relatively stable recently. The main issue faced by eastern whippoorwills is, you guessed it, habitat loss, because it's always habitat loss. In this case, the loss of open understory forests. This can be a result of conversion of forest to cropland, pasture, urbanization, or fire suppression that often leads to dense understories. If farmland is abandoned and allowed to revert to open understory forest, some habitat can be created, but, well, that's not really happening in many places now, is it? Whippoorwills are also extremely vulnerable to vehicle collisions since they fly low over, or worse, perch on roads when they're foraging. So that, my feral friends, is a mysterious and magical whippoorwill. I know I've heard them in my lifetime, in my youth, but man, it's been a long, long time for sure. But it is kind of magical when you're privileged enough to hear one. But don't let them drive you mad. Just get some earplugs or take an Ambien or something, okay? Okay. If you want to support the podcast, here's some ways to do that. Become a patron. Subscriptions start at a mere $5 a month, and with 3 paid months, you get some sweet Dispatches from the Forest merch. Find all the details at patreon.com/dispatchesfromtheforest. You can donate through PayPal using my email address, dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com. Also, how to contact me if you have a question, a comment, or request for a future episode. If you want to just send me a check, hey, that's great. Just email me and I'll let you know what my mailing address is. Or you can donate using the Cash App and the hashtag ForestNerd. Go check out the merch store at cafepress.com/shop/dispatchesfromtheforest. Click on products, find something you like. We got a lot of cool stuff over there. Finally, follow Dispatches from the Forest on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. The Dispatches from the Forest podcast is a production of Dispatches from the Forest, may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.